I need to say this now, before I talk myself out of it again. My name is Caleb Bryn. I'm 31. I grew up in a town called Harmon, in a valley in Western Virginia that doesn't appear on most maps and barely appears on the ones it does. The town has one traffic light, one gas station, one church that doubles as a polling station, and a forest on its northern border that every person who has ever lived there knows. With the certainty you know your own middle name. You do not enter after dark. I'm not in Harmon right now. I'm in a motel room 17 miles south, on the state road, and I'm writing this because in about 4 hours I'm going to drive back in and do something I cannot undo. I need a record of why I'm doing it. I need it to exist outside of me because the two people who know what I know are both compromised. One by guilt, one by something I still don't have a clean word for. I'll start where it started for me again. 8 days ago, the phone call. I hadn't spoken to Nora Vassie in 6 years. Not because of a fight. We just let the rope go slack the way you do when someone reminds you of a version of yourself you've outgrown. We grew up 4 houses apart on Mackin Road. We were close the way kids in small towns are close. Proximity mistaken for destiny, until one of you leaves and discovers that the rest of the world doesn't organize itself around Friday bonfires, and whose dad has a truck. I left Harmon at 19, Nora left at 20. We both ended up in different parts of Virginia. I do HVAC installation in Roanoke. She does veterinary tech work near Staunton. We are not extraordinary people. I say that without self-pity. We are exactly the kind of people small towns produce and release. Competent, quiet, employable, carrying a hometown in our chests like a stone we occasionally press on to feel something. So when Nora called me at 11 on a Tuesday night, I knew someone was dead. Dale Machin, she said. I sat down on the edge of my bed. Dale Machin. The name detonated 100 images at once. A tall man in a canvas jacket walking the tree line at dusk. A man with hands so large they made a coffee mug look like a thimble. A man who coached Pee-wee baseball for 30 years despite having no children. A man who every single kid in Harmon understood, without anyone ever saying so directly, was the reason you did not go into the Arlen Forest after dark. When? I asked. Friday. Funeral Saturday. This Saturday? 4 days from now. His sister's organising. She wants it done fast. I asked how he died. Nora said the official word was a cardiac event. Found in his home, alone. Which tracked. Dale had lived alone for as long as anyone could remember. In the last house on the north side of Mackin Road. The one closest to the tree line. The one with the big front porch and the motion sensor floods that illuminated the first 30 feet of the meadow between his yard and the forest. Caleb, she said, I need you to come back for this. I'm not sure. I need you to come, not for the funeral, for after. The way she said after had a specific weight. I recognized it. It was the same weight her voice carried when we were 16, and she told me she'd seen something at the edge of the meadow while walking home from my house. The same weight when she said, at 17, that she'd found something in the county library's archived property surveys that didn't match the maps the town used. The same weight, years later, in what turned out to be our last real conversation, when she told me she thought the rule about the forest wasn't about safety. She thought it was about concealment. I told her she was overthinking it. That every small town has a forest the kids aren't supposed to enter. That it was just parenting mythology. She'd looked at me with an expression I can still feel. Not anger, not disappointment, but the particular loneliness of someone who's just learned that the person they trusted most will choose comfort over curiosity every time. That was 6 years ago. She stopped calling. I stopped reaching out, and the stone in my chest got a little heavier, the way things do when you know you failed someone and chose to reinterpret it as having been reasonable. I said, "I'll come." I drove up on Thursday. The valley hadn't changed. That's the thing about places like Harmon. They exist in a kind of temporal amber. The gas station had a new awning. The church had a new sign. But the light was the same. The way the road curved past the elementary school was the same. The way the mountains pressed in on both sides, making the sky a narrow ribbon, was the same. And the forest was the same. I could see it from the south entrance to town, a dark, unbroken mass along the entire northern horizon, running east to west for what had to be 4 or 5 miles. The Arlen Forest, state-owned land, technically, unmaintained, no trails, no signage, no campgrounds, just oak, hemlock and laurel thicket running up the north slope of the valley into terrain that got steep fast. I had never been inside it after dark. I had never known anyone who had. That's not quite right. I had never known anyone who admitted they had. There were stories, of course. Every generation of Harmon kids produced its own version. Somebody's older brother went in on a dare and came back wrong. Somebody's cousin went in to retrieve a dog and was found the next morning 2 miles from where he entered, with no memory of the intervening hours. Somebody heard screaming. Somebody saw lights. But the stories weren't the rule. The rule preceded the stories. The rule was older than anyone's memory, and it was maintained not by fear, but by consensus. The adults of Harmon did not tell their children scary stories about the forest. They simply said, with the same flat certainty they used for traffic safety and electrical outlets, "You don't go in after dark." If someone asked why, the answer was always some version of "because you don't." And that was enough. It was enough because it came from everywhere. Every parent, every teacher, every neighbour, every coach, including Dale Machen, especially Dale Machen. Dale was the closest thing Harmon had to a forest warden, though no one called him that, and the position didn't officially exist. He walked the tree line at dusk, every night, for decades. He maintained the meadow between the last row of houses and the forest easy, mowing it in summer, keeping it clear in fall, salting the footpath in winter. He had installed, at his own expense, a series of solar-powered lights along the boundary, not in the forest, along the outside edge, facing out, as if the purpose were not to illuminate what was inside, but to mark clearly where inside began. I'd asked him about it once, when I was maybe 14. He'd been replacing one of the light posts, and I'd wandered over. "Mr. Machen, what's actually in there?" He'd looked at me with the steady eyes, and said, "It's not about what's in there, Caleb. It's about the agreement." "What agreement?" "The one where everybody stays where they belong." That sentence had lived in me for 17 years. I thought about it as I pulled into town, parked at the gas station, and waited for Nora. She pulled up in a green pickup I didn't recognize. She'd changed, not dramatically. She was still the same wiry, watchful woman with dark hair cut short and the posture of someone perpetually ready to lift something heavy. But there was a directness in her face that was new, a settled quality. She'd stopped waiting for permission. She got out. We looked at each other across the parking lot. 6 years. Then she walked over and hugged me briefly and firmly and said, "Thank you for coming. You said after the funeral. What are we doing after the funeral?" She leaned against her truck and crossed her arms. "I need to show you something in Dale's house. His sister gave me access. She's sorting his estate and she doesn't want to do it alone, and she doesn't know what she's looking at. But I do. Or I think I do." "What is it?" "Dale kept records. 41 years of them." "Records of what?" Nora looked north toward the tree line, which from the gas station was a dark smudge beyond the rooftops. "Of what's in the forest, what he put there, what he was keeping everyone away from." I felt the stone in my chest turn over. "Nora," she said, "don't do what you did last time. I'm not speculating. I've already been inside the house. I've seen the first room. I need someone else to see it, so I know I'm reading it right. And I need it to be you because you're the only person from here I trust who doesn't still live here. I asked her what she meant by the first room. Dale converted his basement into an archive. Floor-to-ceiling shelving, binders, maps, photographs, soil samples. All organized by year, going back to 1983, the year he moved to Harmon. Dale wasn't from Harmon. No, nobody under 40 remembers that, but no. He moved here in 83 from Elkins. He was 26. He bought the house on Mackin Road, the one closest to the tree line, and he started walking the boundary within his first month. Why? Nora opened her truck door and gestured for me to get in. That's what the records explain, and it's not what I expected. It's not what you're going to expect either. It's worse in a way I didn't think possible, and it's also, Caleb, it's also fixable. That's why I called you. Not to show you something terrible, to ask you to help me fix it. We didn't go to Dale's house that afternoon. Nora said the sister, a woman named Peg, who lived in Morgantown and had barely visited Harmon in 20 years, wouldn't be available until Saturday after the funeral, so we had Thursday evening and all of Friday to wait. Nora was staying at the old Garner house, which belonged to a family she'd done vet work for and who'd offered it while they were away. I checked into the motel on the State Road. We agreed to meet on Friday morning at the diner on Route 11. That first evening I drove around. Harmon looked the same, but felt different. The way any place feels different when you return, knowing something about it might not be what you thought. I drove past the school, past the church, past the baseball diamond where Dale had coached me through a season of striking out at every at-bat with patience that now, in retrospect, seemed almost penitential. I drove past his house. It was dark. Of course, the man was dead, but it had always had a light on. Every night, every season. For the entire duration of my childhood, Dale Machen's porch light and his perimeter floods had been part of the town's nightscape, the way the church steeple and the gas station sign were. Seeing the house dark felt like a missing tooth in the valley's face. I parked across the road and looked at it. A modest 2-story with a wraparound porch, set back from the road on a half-acre lot. Beyond it, the meadow, maybe 150 yards of mowed grass, and then the tree line. The solar lights Dale had installed were still on, little amber markers running east to west in a line so straight it looked surveyed, and beyond them, the Arlen forest, massive and black and silent under a clear quarter moon. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing happened. The trees didn't move. No lights appeared. No sound emerged. It was just a forest at night, the way a million forests sit at night across the Appalachians, full of deer and coyotes and the slow, patient work of decomposition. But I didn't get out of the car. Friday at the diner, Nora laid out what she'd found so far. She'd been in Dale's house once already, the previous Tuesday, helping Peg start the process of sorting his belongings. The main floor was unremarkable. A bachelor's house, clean and spare. The basement was something else. He built shelving down both walls, she said. Floor to ceiling, industrial grade, and every shelf is full. Binders 3-ring, labelled by year, 1983 through 2024. Inside each binder, photographs, handwritten logs, photocopied land surveys, soil test results, water table readings, and this is the part, Caleb. Incident reports for what? For every time someone went into the forest, but after dark. I set my coffee down. People went in, not often, maybe once or twice a year, usually teenagers. And Dale knew every time. He tracked it. He logged who, when, where they entered, how long they were inside, and what happened when they came out. What happened when they came out? Nora looked at me steadily. Most of the time, nothing. They came out scared, or disoriented, or just cold and embarrassed. Dale would be waiting at the tree line. He'd walk them home. He'd talk to their parents. He'd make sure the rule got reinforced, and the kids would grow up and tell the story as a spooky anecdote, and the rule would hold for another year. What about the other times? 3 incidents, 1987, 1999, 2011, almost exactly 12 years apart, which Dale noted himself in a separate log he kept in a red binder on a different shelf. In each case, someone went in, went deep, past a specific contour line Dale had marked on his maps, and did not come out the same. What does not the same mean? I don't know yet. The red binder is the one I haven't fully read. Peg found it separate from the others, locked in a fireproof box under Dale's bed. She gave me the key, but I stopped reading after the first 20 pages because I realized I shouldn't be doing this alone. I sat with that. The diner around us was doing its quiet Friday business. 2 old men at the counter, a family in the corner booth, the waitress refilling ketchup bottles. Completely normal. And Nora was telling me that the man this town had trusted to keep them safe had been running a 40-year solo surveillance operation on a forest. Nora. What do you think he was hiding? She took a breath. I think he wasn't hiding something in the forest. I think he was hiding something he did to the forest. And I think the rule everybody follows, the rule nobody questions. I think Dale invented it, or at least he's the one who made it stick. And he did it because if anyone went deep enough, they'd find out what he'd been doing since 1983. The funeral was Saturday at 11. The whole town came, which in Harmon meant maybe 300 people filling the church and spilling onto the lawn. Dale's casket was closed. Peg spoke briefly, a composed, grey-haired woman with Dale's same large frame and quiet voice. She said her brother had loved Harmon, that he'd devoted his life to the town's safety, that he'd been a good man. She said it in a way that sounded like she was trying to convince herself. I watched the faces in the pews. These were people I'd grown up with. Mr. and Mrs. Harlan, who ran the gas station, Tom Dwyer, who taught 7th grade, old Gloria Vance, who'd been the town librarian for 35 years, and who looked today like she hadn't slept in a week. The parents of kids I'd played baseball with. The adults who'd told me, in that flat, universal voice, not to go into the forest. I watched them grieve, and I realized what Nora had already understood, that none of them were surprised. Not surprised that Dale was dead, but not surprised by the way they were feeling about it. They grieved the way people grieve when a burden they didn't realize they were sharing suddenly has no one to carry it. There was relief in the church, under the sadness, woven into the hymns and the casserole plans and the handshakes. Relief. As if a long watch had ended and now the question was simply, who would pick it up? After the service, Nora and I found Peg at the Machen house. She was standing on the porch looking at the meadow. I want this done, she said. I want the house emptied and sold within the month. I don't want to come back here after this week. Whatever's in the basement, I need someone local to deal with it. Nora, you offered. I'm taking you up on it. She gave Nora a key and a notarized letter granting access to the property for estate sorting purposes. Then she went inside to pack her bag. She was driving back to Morgantown that night. Nora looked at me. I nodded. We went downstairs. I need to describe this carefully because the basement was the first thing that rewrote my understanding, and I want to get the sequence right. The stairs were narrow and carpeted. The basement itself was dry, well lit. Dale had installed overhead fluorescents and cool in the way all below-grade rooms in this valley are in late spring. The shelving Nora had described ran along both long walls, and she was right. Floor to ceiling, industrial grade, the kind you see in warehouse stockrooms. Every shelf was full. The binders were organized chronologically, left to right, 1983 to 2024. 41 binders on the left wall. On the right wall, a different system. topographic maps in flat file drawers, soil sample containers in sealed rows, and a series of large format photographs. Aerial shots of the Arlen forest taken from what looked like a small plane or a drone, dated at intervals going back to the early 2000s. I went to the maps first because I could read them. I've done enough HVAC work in crawl spaces and attics to understand contour lines and survey markers. The maps were US Geological Survey quadrangles, but Dale had overlaid his own annotations in red ink. He'd drawn a boundary inside the forest, not at the tree line, but roughly a quarter-mile in. The boundary was irregular, following the terrain, and he'd labelled it in small, precise handwriting, primary perimeter. Inside the primary perimeter, he'd drawn a second boundary, deeper in, secondary perimeter. And inside that, roughly at the centre of the forest, where the slope crested before dropping into a ravine system on the north side, a circle, maybe 200 metres in diameter, labelled Origin Site. Origin of what? I said. Nora pulled the red binder from a shelf behind me. She'd been holding back, letting me arrive at the same questions she'd already reached. Sit down, she said. We sat at a workbench Dale had built against the back wall. Nora opened the binder. The first page was handwritten in Dale's precise script. Dated September 14th, 1983, it read, I have completed the initial dispersal. 17 drums distributed across the origin site, per the pattern described in the Harlan-Waverly report. Soil coverage adequate. No immediate surface evidence. Estimated absorption timeline 6 to 8 months before subsurface migration begins. I will monitor monthly. I read it twice. Then I looked at Nora. Drums, I said. Keep reading. The next several pages were monthly logs. Dale had been monitoring the soil at the origin site, taking samples, measuring pH, testing for specific compounds he abbreviated as HCl-7, DNP, and something he called the substrate. The readings changed over time. The soil chemistry shifted. Dale recorded it methodically, with the calm of someone running a long experiment. Then, on a page dated March 1984, 6 months after the initial entry, first visible surface effect observed at the origin site. The vegetation pattern has changed within a 30-metre radius. Growth is accelerated in some species and arrested in others. The substrate is behaving as predicted by the Harlan-Waverly model, but at a rate approximately 3 times faster than projected. This may be due to the limestone geology, which I did not account for. I need to recalculate the containment timeline. He put something in the ground, I said. He put chemicals in the ground, Nora said. Industrial chemicals in 1983. Deliberately. In a pattern. According to a model from a report I haven't been able to find anywhere. Why? Turn to page 41. I turned. Page 41 was a different kind of document. Not a log entry, but a personal statement, written in a more discursive hand, as if Dale had been writing late at night with less discipline. I was contracted in May 1982 by the Harlan-Waverly Resource Group to conduct a subsurface dispersal trial at a remote forested site in Appalachian, Virginia. The stated purpose was soil remediation research, testing the long-term absorption rates of industrial byproducts in limestone karst geology. I was 25 and had just finished a master's degree in environmental geology from WVU. I needed the money. The site was selected because it met 3 criteria: remote, geologically appropriate, and unmonitored. Harlan-Waverly provided the drums, the dispersal pattern, the monitoring protocol, and the payment. $45,000 over 2 years. I moved to Harmon in August 1983 because it was the closest settlement to the site. I did not intend to stay. I intended to complete the 2-year monitoring contract and leave. I stayed because by March 1984 I understood that what I had put in the ground was not a remediation substrate. It was a waste. Industrial waste from a process I was not told about, containing compounds I could not fully identify, was migrating through the caste system faster than any model predicted. The drums were disintegrating, the substrate was entering the water table, and the forest was responding. I stopped reading and looked at the shelves around me. 41 years. This man had lived in this town for 41 years because he poisoned its forest when he was 26 and couldn't figure out how to undo it without destroying himself. The rule, I said. The rule, he created it, Nora said. Not overnight. Over the years. He embedded himself in the community. He coached baseball, he mowed the meadow, he walked the tree line. He made himself the most trusted, most visible, most reliable person in Harmon. And he did all of it so that when he said, "Don't go in the forest," people would listen, not because of a ghost story, because Dale Machen said so. And Dale Machen was a good man. The genius of it, and I use that word with nausea, was that it worked. The rule held for 4 decades. People stayed out. The forest sat on its northern ridge, vast and dark and undisturbed, and the chemicals Dale had buried in 1983 did whatever they were going to do without witnesses. But people did go in, I said. You said 3 incidents, 3 that went deep enough to reach the origin site, and whatever they found there, whatever the long-term effect of those compounds on the soil and the water and the ecosystem is, they came back changed. Dale's notes on all 3 are in the back of this binder, and Caleb, they're detailed. He tracked these people for years afterward. He felt responsible. He tried to help them, but he never told them why they were affected, because telling them would mean admitting what he'd done. I closed the binder. My hands were not steady. Where are these 3 people now? One moved away in the 90s, the 87 case. A teenager named Randy Salt. Dale lost track of him around 2003. The 99 case was a woman named Beth Garner. Garner, like the house you're staying in? Her parents' house. Beth died in 2006. Pancreatic cancer. She was 31. The air in the basement felt very still. And the 2011 case. Nora didn't answer right away. She closed the binder and placed both hands flat on its cover, the way you steady yourself before saying something you've been carrying alone for too long. The 2011 case was me. I'm going to describe the next 2 hours as clearly as I can, because this is where the story pivots, and I need you to understand both what Nora told me and how I responded. After all, my response is part of the problem. Nora had gone into the Arlen Forest in August 2011. She was 20. She'd just finished her first year of community college and was back in Harmon for the summer. She went in because of the property surveys she'd found in the county library, the ones she'd told me about when we were 17. The surveys showed that a parcel at the centre of the forest had been leased, not to an individual, but to a corporate entity called Harlan Waverley Resource Group in 1982. The lease had expired in 1984 and was never renewed, but the parcel existed. It was real, and nobody in Harmon had ever mentioned it. She went in during the day, following a compass bearing she'd plotted from the survey coordinates. She reached the origin site in about 90 minutes. What she found was a clearing. Not a natural clearing, but a place where the forest had grown differently. The trees at the perimeter were enormous, far larger than they should have been for their species and age. Inside the perimeter, the trees were stunted, twisted, growing at angles that didn't track with the slope. The ground was discoloured. There was no understory, no ferns, no moss, no ground cover of any kind. Just bare earth with a chemical sheen that caught the light. And in the centre, the remains of the drums, corroded, collapsed, partially buried, but unmistakable. Industrial waste containers in a deliberate radial pattern. Nora photographed everything. She collected soil samples in Ziploc bags. She marked her GPS coordinates, and she left. She did not come back changed in the way Dale's notes described for the other 2 cases. Or rather, she didn't think she had. But in the weeks after, she developed headaches, persistent, low-grade, resistant to medication. Her sleep deteriorated. She had episodes of what she described as sensory crowding, moments when every sound and smell and texture in her environment amplified to an almost unbearable intensity, then abruptly normalized. These episodes lasted between 30 seconds and 3 minutes and occurred without pattern. She went to a doctor in Staunton, then a neurologist in Charlottesville. The scans showed nothing. The blood work showed nothing. The symptoms persisted, fluctuating in intensity for about 18 months, then gradually subsided to a level she described as livable. She still gets them. She had one at the diner that morning. I noticed her grip tighten on her coffee mug and her eyes go briefly unfocused. But I'd attributed it to emotion. I've been living with this for 15 years, she said. And until Tuesday I didn't know why. I thought it was the forest. Something in the forest. Something natural that I'd reacted to. Dale let me think that. He knew I'd been in there. He confronted me 3 days after I went, said he'd seen my tracks at the tree line, asked me if I was all right. I told him about the drums. I told him I thought someone had illegally dumped something in the forest. He said he was aware of it. He said it was a historical issue that was being managed. He said the compounds were mostly inert now and I'd be fine. He lied to your face. He lied to my face while knowing exactly what I'd been exposed to, because he's the one who put it there. I sat with that. The basement hummed under the fluorescent lights. Dale Machin, the man who'd taught me to keep my elbow up during a swing, the man who'd shown me how to change a tire when I was 15, the man who'd told me in his quiet, steady way that the forest was about the agreement, everyone staying where they belonged. The agreement was a cover story. The forest wasn't haunted. It was contaminated. And the haunting, the whole mythology, the rule, the dusk walks, the perimeter lights, was one man's 40-year project to prevent anyone from discovering what he'd done. Nora, I said, what are we fixing? She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of photographs she'd taken in the house on Tuesday. Not the basement, the kitchen. On Dale's kitchen table, weighed down by a coffee mug, was a letter, handwritten, addressed to no one. She'd photographed each page. I read it on her phone screen while she watched my face. The letter was Dale's confession, written based on the date, about 2 weeks before he died. It was 6 pages long, and it said, in substance, the following. He had been monitoring the origin site for 41 years. The compounds had migrated far beyond his initial projections. They were in the water table, not in the town's water. Harmon drew from a different aquifer, but in the forest's internal hydrology, the network of seeps and springs and subsurface streams that fed the forest ecosystem, the contamination had fundamentally altered the soil chemistry within the primary perimeter and was beginning to affect the secondary perimeter. Tree core samples he'd taken in 2022 showed absorption of compounds he could not name into the wood itself. The forest was not dying. That was the part that frightened him. The forest was thriving. The contamination was acting as an accelerant. Growth rates were anomalous. Root systems were interconnected in ways he'd never seen documented. The mycorrhizal networks, the fungal webs connecting tree roots underground, had expanded and deepened to a degree that his soil probes could no longer reach their lower boundary. And the 3 people who had reached the origin site, all 3, had been exposed not just to surface chemicals, but to volatile compounds released by the fungal network when the soil was disturbed by foot traffic. These volatiles were neurologically active. Dale didn't know their exact composition, but he'd sent samples to a private lab in 2019 under a false name, and been told the results were anomalous and required further study. The lab had tried to contact him repeatedly. He'd never responded. The letter ended with a paragraph I will reproduce exactly as Nora photographed it. I did not start this with malice. I was young and in debt, and the work seemed legitimate. By the time I understood what I'd done, the only choices were confession, which would have meant prosecution, clean-up costs I could never pay, and the destruction of the community's trust in the one person keeping them safe, or management. I chose management. I built the rule. I enforced it. I kept people out, and for 41 years it held. But I am dying, and the rule will die with me, and someone will go into the forest, and they will reach the origin site, and what happens to them will be my fault. So I am writing this down, and I am asking whoever finds it to do what I could not, tell the truth, and then fix the ground. The contamination can be remediated. I have the data. The binders contain everything a qualified team would need. The forest can be cleaned, but only if someone admits it was poisoned. Dale Machin died of a heart attack 2 weeks after writing this letter. Whether the timing was a coincidence or a consequence, I don't know. But he died with the letter on his kitchen table in a house with a basement full of evidence, trusting that someone would find it and be braver than he was. Nora found it, and she called me. I need to explain what happened on Sunday, because Sunday is when this stopped being a story about a man who poisoned a forest and became something else. Nora wanted to go to the original site, not to explore, to photograph the current state, collect fresh soil samples and begin assembling a remediation case she could bring to the State Environmental Agency. She had the GPS coordinates from her 2011 visit. She had Dale's maps. She had his data. What she needed was a current site assessment and a witness. I didn't want to go. I told her that directly, not because I was afraid of the forest. In daylight, with the full understanding that the threat was chemical, not supernatural. The fear felt manageable, but because I was afraid of what going in might do to Nora. She'd been exposed once. 15 years of headaches and sensory episodes. Going back was a risk. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me 6 years ago, and I understood that this was the test again. The same test. Was I going to choose comfort, or was I going to go with her? We entered the forest at 9 in the morning from the tree line behind Dale's house. The first quarter mile was normal. Dense oak hickory forest, the kind I'd grown up seeing from the outside. Leaf litter, bird song, the crunch of last fall's leaves under our boots. The terrain rose gradually. Then we crossed the primary perimeter. I knew we'd crossed it because the forest changed. Not dramatically, not like a movie, not like walking through a door. It was more like the difference between a photograph and the same photograph with the contrast turned up slightly. The greens got deeper, the trunks got wider. The canopy closed in, and the light dropped, even though the sky above was clear. And it was quiet, not silent. There was wind. There were distant birds, but the close-range sounds had thinned. No squirrel chatter, no insect buzz, no rustling in the underbrush. The forest was alive, but still, the way a room is still when everyone in it is paying attention to the same thing. Nora moved steadily, navigating by GPS and compass. I followed. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say that the forest wasn't already saying for us. About 45 minutes in, we crossed the secondary perimeter, and here the change was no longer subtle. The trees were massive, not just old growth large, implausibly large. Oaks with trunks I could get my arms around. Hemlocks that shot up like columns into a canopy so dense it felt like dusk at 10 in the morning. The root systems were visible on the surface, thick, interlocked, running between trees in patterns that looked almost deliberate, like cables laid by a work crew. The ground between the roots was bare, no undergrowth, no leaf litter, just smooth, dark earth with an oily quality that caught the filtered light. And the smell, a mineral smell, wet and sharp like the air inside a copper mine. Not unpleasant exactly, but dense. It filled the sinuses and sat there. Nora stopped. She was looking at her GPS. "We're close," she said. "Another 300 meters. How are you feeling?" She paused. "Crowded, the way I described. Like every input is trying to come in at the same time. But I can manage it. Can you feel anything?" I could. A pressure behind my eyes. Faint but definite, like the beginning of a sinus headache. And something else. A low hum, not in my ears but in my chest. As if the ground itself were vibrating at a frequency I couldn't hear but could feel through my boots. "I feel something," I said. "We should be quick." We covered the last 300 meters and reached the original site. It was worse than what Nora had described in 2011. The clearing had expanded. Where she remembered a roughly 50-meter diameter, it was now closer to 100. The twisted trees at the perimeter were larger, and some had grown toward each other, their upper branches intertwined in a lattice that formed a near-complete canopy over the clearing, blocking all but the thinnest threads of light. The ground was different. In 2011, Nora said it had been bare with a chemical sheen. Now it was covered in a continuous mat of fungal growth, pale, almost white, with a texture like damp leather. The mat extended unbroken across the entire clearing, rising slightly over the buried remnants of the drums, which were visible as regular mounds in the surface. The smell here was overpowering. The mineral sharpness was layered with something organic. Not decay, not rot, but something metabolic. The smell of a living process at a scale I couldn't see. Nora took photographs. I collected soil samples using gloves and sealed bags from the kit she'd brought. We worked quickly. Neither of us spoke above a whisper, though I couldn't have explained why. It took about 20 minutes, and then Nora said, "Caleb, look at this." She was at the far edge of the clearing, where the fungal mat met the tree line. She was pointing down. I walked over and looked. The mat wasn't just on the ground. It was growing up the trees. A thin, almost transparent layer of the same pale fungal material was climbing the trunks of the nearest trees, extending up to about head height, and embedded in the mat, at intervals, were objects, small objects, dull metal, regularly spaced. I knelt and looked more closely. They were bottle caps, old ones, corroded, pressed into the fungal material as if they'd been laid there deliberately. Beside them, a fragment of cloth, a rusted zipper, a piece of shoelace. "These are from the drums," I said. "No," Nora said. "Look at the distribution. These aren't in the drum pattern. They're at the edges, near the paths people would have walked in on." I understood what she was saying before she said it. These belong to the people who came in. The fungal mat is incorporating surface material, anything left on the ground, anything dropped, shed, tracked in. It absorbs. That bottle cap is a Coca-Cola cap from probably the 80s or 90s. The zipper is from a jacket. The shoelace looks modern. How modern? Nora didn't answer. She was staring at something further along the tree line, where the mat climbed higher. I followed her gaze. Hanging from a low branch, partially enveloped by the pale fungal growth, was a cell phone, an older model, maybe 10 years old. Its screen was dark. The fungal material had grown over its edges, holding it in place like a frame. "That could be from the 2011 case," Nora said. "From me." I dropped my phone somewhere around here. I thought I'd lost it in the leaf litter. The forest kept it. The fungal network kept it, the same network that's in the soil, in the root systems, in everything Dale was monitoring for 40 years. It's not just growing, it's collecting. We left. We left quickly and by the route, and neither of us spoke until we were back in the meadow behind Dale's house, in sunlight, with the tree line 20 feet behind us. Then Nora sat in the grass and had an episode, the worst I'd seen. She pressed both hands to her temples and her eyes went wide and unfocused, and her breathing went shallow for almost 3 full minutes. I sat beside her and put my hand on her back and waited. When it passed, she looked at me and said, "It's stronger. Whatever's in the air at the origin site is more concentrated now than it was 15 years ago. And it's not just the origin site anymore. I could feel it at the secondary perimeter. Dale's containment is failing, the network is expanding, and with Dale gone, there's no one maintaining the boundary. The solar lights, the lights don't do anything. They were in the theatre. The only thing that kept people out was Dale's reputation, and now Dale is dead, and his house is going to be sold to a stranger, and within a year, someone is going to walk into that forest and reach the origin site and stand on a fungal mat that is actively incorporating biological material into itself, and they're going to breathe air that causes neurological effects that last the rest of their life." She looked at me. I looked at her. "So we tell someone," I said. "We tell everyone. This is where the story becomes something I didn't expect, because telling people was not the struggle I'd braced for. The struggle was something else entirely. On Monday, Nora and I drove to the county seat and filed a report with the regional office of the State Department of Environmental Quality. We brought Dale's letter, photographs of the original site, soil samples, and a selection of his monitoring binders. The DEQ officer, a tired man named Garrett who looked like he'd been reviewing mining complaints for 30 years, listened to everything, examined the photographs, and said he'd escalate it for a site assessment. "How long?" Nora asked. "Depends on priority level. Could be a few weeks for the initial review. If the contaminants match what you're describing, they'd dispatch a field team. This has been in the ground for 41 years. Ma'am, I understand the urgency, but I've got 57 open cases in this district, and 12 of them are active mine drainage into public waterways. Your site is on state forest land with no residential proximity to the contamination zone. It's a quarter-mile from a town, from the tree line. The contamination, by your own maps, is centralized a half-mile inside the forest. I'm not dismissing this. I'm telling you the timeline. We left." In the parking lot, Nora leaned against the truck and closed her eyes. "This is what Dale counted on," she said. "The system moves slowly enough that the rule holds longer than the truth. But here's where I surprised myself, and here's where I surprised Nora, which is something I didn't think I was still capable of after 6 years of being the person who chose comfort. Then we go around the system," I said. Nora opened her eyes. "Dale's letter is a written confession. His binders are 41 years of evidence. The soil samples are testable. We don't wait for Garrett to put us in his queue. We contact the state environmental advocacy groups. We contact the press, not the county weekly, the state outlets. We filed under the state's hazardous waste notification statute, which I looked up last night, and which requires the DEQ to initiate a preliminary assessment within 14 days of a citizen report. If the report includes documented evidence of illegal dumping, we file it correctly, and they can't bury it in a backlog." Nora stared at me. "You looked up the statute." I was up until 2 in the morning. Something passed across her face. Noah, to my surprise. Exactly. Recognition. Like she was seeing the version of me she'd always believed was in there, finally showing up 15 years late. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." We spent Tuesday and Wednesday building the case. Nora organized Dale's data into a presentable format. I filed the formal citizen report under the hazardous waste statute, referencing the specific code sections, attaching photographs, including Dale's letter as a sworn statement, deceased, and requesting the 14-day preliminary assessment. I sent copies to 3 state environmental organizations and 2 press contacts Nora had from her vet network, who'd covered agricultural contamination stories. On Thursday, we got a call from a journalist named Alice Farm at a regional investigative outlet. She'd received our packet and wanted to visit the site. We told her the site was dangerous and she shouldn't go in without proper equipment. She said she'd bring her own respirator and a photographer. And then something happened that I didn't anticipate. The town found out. Not from us. From Peg. Dale's sister, back in Morgantown, had been contacted by the DEQ as next of kin for the estate. She called Gloria Vance, the town librarian, because Gloria was the person in Harmon everyone called when they didn't know who else to call, and Gloria called Tom Dwyer, and Tom called the Harlands, and by Thursday evening the network had done what small-town networks do. Everybody knew, and they were angry, but not at Dale. At us. Friday morning, Nora and I were at the diner. Tom Dwyer walked in, saw us, and sat down at our table without being invited. "You two need to stop what you're doing," he said. "Tom, I know what Dale did. We all knew. Maybe not the details, not the drums, not the chemicals, but we knew. He told people, Caleb, not everyone. But enough. He told me in 2004. He told Gloria in the 90s. He told your parents, Nora. Nora went still. He told the people who mattered. And we agreed, all of us together, that the best thing for this town was to keep the rule and let Dale manage it. Because the alternative was what you're doing right now. State agencies, press, headlines, contaminated forests behind small town, 40-year cover-up. Do you know what that does to a place like Harmon? Tom, there are neurological effects. I know about Beth Garner. I know about Randy's salt. I know about you. You think we didn't know? Dale told us. He told us, and we helped him help you. And we're the ones who drove Beth to her appointments in Charlottesville for 3 years. And we're the ones who checked on Randy until he moved. And we're the ones who watched you, Nora, for years after you went in, making sure you were all right. I'm not all right, Nora said. I have episodes. I've had them for 15 years. And they're manageable. You said so yourself to your mother. In 2013, you said, I can live with this. And you have. And you're alive and working and here, and what you're about to do is burn this town to the ground to punish a dead man who spent his entire life trying to fix his mistake. The diner was quiet. The 2 old men at the counter were watching. The waitress had stopped moving. This was the part I didn't expect. Not a conspiracy of silence, a conspiracy of care. The town had known. Not all of it, not the specifics, but enough. They'd known the forest was wrong. They'd known Dale was responsible. And they'd decided, collectively, generationally, that the best response was to keep the secret, port the affected, and let the man who caused it spend his life making amends through service. It was, in its way, the most humane cover-up I'd ever heard of. And it was also a cover-up. And somewhere in a forest a quarter-mile away, a fungal network was growing, and the volatile compounds it released were getting stronger, and the containment was no one's job anymore. Tom, I said, the contamination is spreading. Dale's own data shows the network is expanding past his secondary perimeter. In 5 years, maybe less, it reaches the primary perimeter. That's the tree line. That's your backyard. Tom looked at me. He looked old, suddenly. Old and tired and carrying a weight I was only now understanding he'd been sharing with Dale for 20 years. Then we manage it, he said. We find someone, another Dale, someone local. You can't manage subsurface contaminant plume with solar lights and a mowing schedule. This needs professional remediation. It needs soil extraction, mycological treatment, and water table monitoring by people with equipment Dale couldn't afford. It needs the DEQ. It needs to be quiet. It can't be quiet anymore. Dale is dead. The letter exists and I've already filed the report. The statute requires a 14-day response. A journalist is coming next week. This is happening, Tom. The only question is whether the town participates in it or gets run over by it. Tom stared at me for a long time. Then he stood up, walked to the door, and turned. Your parents would be ashamed of you. He left. Nora was crying, not sobbing. just tears, running quietly while she stared at the table. "He's not wrong," she said. "Not about all of it. He's wrong about enough of it. My parents knew what I was exposed to, and they didn't tell me." I reached across the table and took her hand. She let me. "We keep going," I said. "Yeah," she said. "We keep going." The next 3 days were the hardest. The town didn't obstruct us. Harmon is too small for formal obstruction, but it withdrew. People stopped making eye contact at the gas station. The diner got quiet when we walked in. Nobody returned our calls. Peg left a voicemail for Nora saying she regretted giving access to the house and wanted the key returned. Nora returned it. We had copies of everything we needed. On Tuesday, Alice Pham and her photographer arrived. We took them to the tree line, not into the forest, not to the origin site, but to the boundary. We showed them Dale's maps, explained the contamination, and provided soil sample results from a lab Nora had sent them to the week before. The results were preliminary but clear. Heavy metals, chlorinated solvents, and several compounds the lab flagged as uncharacterized organics requiring further analysis. One of the uncharacterized compounds had structural similarities to known neurotoxic agents. Alice wrote the story. It ran on Thursday. The headline was restrained. Deceased volunteers' records reveal decades of unreported chemical dumping in state forest. And the article was careful, factual, and devastating. It included Dale's letter excerpt. It included the lab results. It included a statement from the DEQ confirming receipt of the citizen report and the commencement of a preliminary assessment. It also included a quote from Tom Dwyer, which Alice had obtained by visiting Harmon independently. "Dale Machin was the best man I ever knew. He made a mistake when he was young, and he spent his whole life paying for it. What's happening now isn't justice. It's just exposure." I read that quote in my motel room and sat with it for a long time. The DEQ field team arrived the following Monday. 4 people in protective equipment with soil probes, air quality monitors, and a drone. Nora and I met them at the Machin house. I handed over Dale's complete archive, all 41 binders, all maps, all samples, everything. The team lead, a woman named Dr. Kai, looked at the binders and said, "This is the most complete unauthorized monitoring record I've ever seen. Whoever kept this was more thorough than most of our own field teams." "He was a good scientist," Nora said. "He was also the source of the contamination. I've read the report. We'll need the full site assessment before we determine the remediation scope. But based on what you've provided, this will almost certainly qualify for state Superfund designation. That means federal resources, long-term monitoring, and professional cleanup." "How long?" "Remediation of a site like this, limestone karst, subsurface fungal networks, uncharacterized compounds. We're talking years, maybe a decade. But it starts with the assessment, and the assessment starts today." They went in. Not to the origin site. Not yet. They established a monitoring grid at the primary perimeter and began taking baseline readings. They'd go deeper in subsequent visits with proper equipment and protocols. Nora and I stood in Dale's meadow and watched the team work at the tree line. The solar lights were still on, little amber dots in the grass, marking a boundary that had never been real. "He almost got it right," Nora said. "He got it completely wrong. He kept people safe for 40 years. He kept people ignorant for 40 years. That's not the same thing." Nora was quiet. Then she said, "What happens to me? If the compounds are neurotoxic, if the exposure I had in 2011 is still active, then we get you to a specialist who knows what you were exposed to. Dr. Kai's lab results will tell us exactly what's in the soil, and a neurologist can work from that. This is treatable, Nora, or at least manageable with real information instead of Dale's silence." She looked at me. "You've changed. I was always this person. I just wasn't willing to be uncomfortable. And now Now I'm living in a motel in a town that hates me, filing environmental complaints and taking phone calls from journalists. So considerably uncomfortable. She almost smiled. I'm writing this Wednesday night. Tomorrow morning I'm driving back to Harmon for the third time this week. Dr. Kai's team has completed their preliminary assessment and is presenting initial findings to the town at a meeting in the church. The DEQ has confirmed that the site will be recommended for state Superfund designation. Federal environmental consultants are expected within the month. Harmon is furious and frightened, and beginning, I think, to feel something more complicated than either a kind of collective reckoning with the fact that they chose a good man's reassurance over their own safety and the safety of their children, and that the choice felt like love but functioned like negligence. Tom Dwyer called me tonight, not to apologize, to ask if I thought the remediation would affect property values. I told him I didn't know, and that I'd help him find resources for homeowners in designated Superfund zones. He said thank you. Then he said, Dale would have hated this. And I said, Dale wrote the letter, and Tom was quiet for a while, and then he hung up. Nora is doing better, or she's doing differently. The episodes haven't stopped, but she says they feel different now, less like an intrusion and more like a signal she can locate and understand. She's seeing a neurologist in Charlottesville next month with the lab data. She's not afraid. She's something else. Determined, maybe. Or finally in possession of the information she needed to fight for herself instead of just enduring. I don't know what the forest will be in 10 years. Maybe a remediation site fenced off behind warning signs. Maybe a recovery zone where the soil slowly gives up what Dale put into it 4 decades ago. Maybe something else. Something the fungal network is doing, science doesn't have a model for yet. Dr. Kai said the mycorrhizal expansion is unprecedented in contamination ecology, and that the network may have developed adaptive responses to the compounds that have no documented parallel. She said it with the voice of a scientist who is both excited and uneasy, and I recognized that voice because it's the voice of someone standing at the edge of what they know. I don't know what Harmon will be either. A town that survived its own secret, maybe. A town that learns to be angry at a man it loved, or to love a man it's angry at, or to hold both at the same time and keep functioning. Small towns do this. They metabolize their own history the way the forest metabolizes the chemicals, not by expelling them, but by growing around them, incorporating them, becoming something that includes the damage without being defined by it. I know what I am. I'm the person who showed up this time, 6 years too late, 15 years after it mattered to Nora, and still dragging the weight of every time I chose comfort. But here, showing up, filing the papers and making the calls and sitting next to the person I failed in the grass behind a dead man's house, while the people who fixed what he broke walked into the forest with instruments that could measure what he'd done. That's the story. Not the forest, not the chemicals, not the fungal network or the neurotoxic volatiles or the 41 years of binders on industrial shelving in a dead man's basement. The story is that the rule was broken and the breaking was what saved us. Tomorrow I go back. Nora will be there. The town will be there. The forest will be there. Vast and dark and patient, growing in ways no one fully understands yet. But the lights are on, and this time they're pointing inward.